My name is Michael Rakowitz. I'm an artist living and working in Chicago, and this is an ongoing project that I started in 2007 called The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist. It's a multimedia, multi-layered project that the main part of it is the reconstruction of artifacts that were listed as stolen, damaged, or status unknown in the aftermath of the looting of the Iraq Museum. The museum was looted in April of 2003, and 15,000 objects were at large after these events. And in the years since, they've recovered close to 50% of the artifacts that were listed as missing, which means that about 7,000 or 8,000 more are still out there. And it's my studio assistants and I, for the past 8 years now, have been reconstructing faithful replicas of these. They're listed on the Interpol website. They're also listed on the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago's website under the heading Lost Treasures from Iraq. And that database went live shortly after the looting, mostly for two reasons. One was to educate the public on just how much human cultural patrimony had just been destroyed or went missing. The other was to deter antiquities collectors from acquiring objects in the black or the gray market, and if they did, to do a side-by-side check with the photos and the provenance numbers that were listed. If you go onto the website, you click on a number, and the museum information in terms of the Iraq Museum number, the excavation number, and then this dimension in terms of size comes up. And then there's also photographs of many of these from different sides. And so for a sculptor, it makes one's job relatively easy. So being able to kind of know that this is a sculpture from Hatra, which stands at 93 centimeters tall. And based on the photographs we were able to find, my assistants and I were able to piece together what this sculpture might have looked like before it had been destroyed, smashed on the ground during the looting. To date, we've reconstructed about 500 of these 8,000 artifacts that are missing. It's potentially a project that will outlive me and my studio, which can be a poignant aspect to it because of just how much has been taken and in such a short period of time. We also are starting to make artifacts that were destroyed in the Mosul Museum in Iraq in 2015, and also at various archaeological sites like Nineveh and Nimrud after the Islamic State came to power and started its program of cultural destruction. The Mona Lisa of Nimrud has a really interesting story. This is an artifact that comes from Nimrud from around the Neo-Assyrian period of 720 BC. It's an ivory plaque. I'm reading the description here that's on the Iraq Museum's website. Relief decorated, showed head of a woman smiling en face, hair colored black, probably part of a furniture fitting. So this was a piece that I start to talk about in this drawing over here, because its fate has this kind of horrible poetic symmetry. Though the Mona Lisa of Nimrud survived being thrown down a well by attackers in 612 BC, a traditional way of destroying enemy possessions which paradoxically led to their preservation, it suffered severely along with many other artifacts when museum storerooms were flooded during the sack of Baghdad. The irony that it was actually preserved by being thrown down a well when marauders had more or less sacked Baghdad in 612 BC because the humidity and the temperature was perfect. It ends up suffering the same fate in the aftermath of the looting when the storerooms and the vaults start to flood after looters go into the museum, and it's water that preserves it in one case and then water that destroys it in another. And so each of these objects end up having that same history if you listen close enough to them or you read closely enough. In this case, this is one of the Tel Harmal lions that were destroyed in the Iraq Museum. The looters, I think, had tried to take the head off of the lion, and not knowing how fragile the terracotta was, the entire head shattered beyond repair. And so we don't just reconstruct the head, we reconstruct the entire lion to give the viewer the sense of this kind of aura, or this sort of apparition of what that lion's ghost might look like after its destruction. So these artifacts are actually reconstructed out of the packaging of Middle Eastern foodstuffs and the Arabic English newspapers that are available here in the United States, across the country where there is an Arab community. And for me, this is meant to enlist these fragments of cultural visibility to construct what are now, for all intents and purposes, these invisible objects. There's also another story behind that, which is in a separate project where I reopened my grandfather's import-export business in Brooklyn, the one that he had actually operated in Baghdad before he left Iraq in 1946. The main purpose was to try to import Iraqi dates to the US in over 40 years to kind of, provide a litmus test for the dropping of the sanctions and the lifting of any kind of what would one call it? The lifting of the blockade against Iraq after mission accomplished had been declared. And one of the things that I found out was you couldn't get an Iraqi date in the US, but there were many companies that sold date cookies, date walnut cookies, or what's called in the Middle East mamul. And anytime you bought a package of those mamul cookies, it would say something like product of Syria or product of Lebanon, and these are countries where they don't cultivate or grow dates. And so it became a very well-known secret in those countries and across the Arab world that those companies used Iraqi dates to make the filling, even though the package would say something like, product of Saudi Arabia or any other country. And this was a way that the Iraqi companies were able to circumvent the sanctions against Iraq. And it's a practice that's still in place today. So you end up with these veiled products that are on your store shelves that will not tell you where it's from. So provenance is actually redacted in some way. So for me, there's it adds another layer to this. And being in that shop every day in 2006 for 3 months as we were awaiting, the possible transfer of this 1 ton of dates from Iraq, I was looking at all this packaging, especially during the quiet moments, and it was almost like that was the perfect material to make these things out of.